The Steam Deck was a real surprise success for Valve. I don't think anyone really expected much from it when it was announced, but things like the price and the support that Valve have given it over the years and all of that has just made it like such a good piece of hardware. I would argue that they've actually done a lot for Linux gaming and pushing Linux more into the mainstream and actually making it a viable option for a lot of people for gaming. I mean, I even spent a few months on Linux because of how much I enjoyed the Steam Deck experience. But I would actually love it if they made a console version of the Steam Deck. I think it's all there, you know, there are some things that I think they need to address, which I'll get to in a minute, but I think that there's a lot of potential there that they could really do a lot with it. One of the main things though is if they're going to make a home console, it needs to be competitive with, you know, what's on the market right now. I mean, the PS5, the Switch 2, the Xbox, they're all around £450, $500-ish. So I think getting it in that kind of ballpark is going to be a bit of a challenge. But the Steam Deck is also like extremely affordable. So, but the way that Valve makes up for the cost of entry for the Steam Deck is in those software sales where they get like I think 30% of every sale that's made on Steam. So they could do a similar thing to that. There are a lot of considerations though when it comes to specs. I think if they are going to go with a lower end GPU, they should probably like look around for the 9060. It supports FSR4, so you can do upscaling and stuff like that. But no, I don't expect it to be this like 4K powerhouse machine or anything like that. Because even though I say that it needs to compete with, you know, the PS5 and the Xbox, it's still going to be a bit more of a niche product. You know, it's still going to be it's still more geared towards people who like PC gaming. But if they actually build an SoC for it, I think that, you know, there is potential where they could make it affordable, but there is a lot to consider. The main thing that I want to see though on a home console, because it will be using SteamOS, right? It will be, if hypothetically they do make this console, they'll use SteamOS, and that's great. But I think that what they need to focus on is having HDMI 2.1 support, which is currently not an option with AMD on Linux, because the HDMI forum are just kind of scummy and they don't want an open source driver for HDMI 2.1. So you are limited to HDMI 2.0, and I've talked about that before, and that's actually the reason why I went back to Windows, is because my TV is capable of 4K 120, but I'm not able to properly use all of the features, because using HDMI 2.0, you are relying on like subsampling, so you know you don't get full RGB, you don't even get like 444. That's quite noticeable, especially in certain games. If you're trying to use HDR, for example, which uses a 10-bit color gamut, right? It uses 10-bit, but if you use 8-bit, then it's downsampling it, and you get like color banding, and it's not completely accurate, and you know there's just all of these issues. So they are going to have to figure out a way to get HDMI 2.1 working on Linux if they are going to go down this route. Because I feel like still using HDMI 2.0 in 2025 would be a bit of an oversight. Now, obviously, you know, most games are not going to be running at 4K 120, right? Especially if they're targeting a 7600 or a 9060, it's just not going to happen. But there are certain games that will work, you know, certain indie games and older games, for example, that could really benefit from this higher refresh rate. And also, not to mention the actual operating system itself, where, you know, you're just scrolling, navigating through your library. Things are a lot smoother at 120 FPS, they are. But I do think that if any company is able to push the HDMI forum over the edge as far as allowing HDMI 2.1 on Linux, I think it would be Valve. I think that they would probably be able to do it. Whether they do it in a closed source kind of way where it's only available on SteamOS, which would be kind of bad in and of itself, because that's kind of against the whole point of Linux being open source. Because everything else about a potential Steam home console, it just sounds so good. Like the library of games that are available that are playable on SteamOS right now is really good. Like, the amount of progress that they've made in the last few years has been pretty impressive. Like, you're able to play, most games now. There are the occasional releases that sort of just have problems and don't work very well, but for the most part, it's pretty impressive what you're able to do. Obviously, games with like anti-cheat are still not playable on Linux. Give it a few more years, I imagine that, with the increasing adoption rate of Linux, these companies, these developers are going to want to find ways to allow anti-cheat on Linux. That they'll probably figure it out at some point. Linux keeps growing, like the user base keeps growing, so I think that this will be a viable option in the future. I think that if they are going to release a console, that they do need a system seller, otherwise what's the point, whether that be Half-Life 3 or something completely different. But also there's rumours that the next VR headset from Valve is going to come out like pretty soon. They're gearing up to announce it fairly soon, so I think that having VR support would be another win for this potential console. Like, VR support, as far as I'm aware, is kind of finicky on Linux. Like, there are ways to do it, but it's not the most intuitive experience in the world. They could try to work on that a little bit and make it so that it's more viable, easier to do, so that all of their hardware is basically, compatible with each other, sort of making a kind of an ecosystem of Valve hardware. The main way that you're going to interact with the Steam console is going to be, a controller, and I love a good controller. I think that Valve not releasing like a special Steam controller is kind of crazy at this point. I'm really expecting them to release one sort of in the style of the Steam Deck, just without the screen, right? There's been so many mock-ups online, and even people on YouTube actually making a Steam controller, and they look amazing. But I think that having a specific game that is, played best on this console, i.e. using the features of the controller, like, the track pads and the analog sticks, all of that, the back paddles, there's so much potential there. They should definitely try making a home console. I mean, the SteamOS is pretty much there at this point. You can install it on like PCs and have a good experience on a TV. It's just, again, there are some issues like the lack of HDMI 2.1. But yeah, there's so much potential there, and I really hope that Valve does consider making a console. But I don't know, what do you guys think? This is basically just my sort of wish list of potentially what they could do. But I want to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments, would you buy a Steam console? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.